This is a second lecture in Constitutional Law 1. The executive branch. The approach here is we're going to go through the Constitution, read, and expand on Article 2, especially focusing on the 12th and 25th Amendment. And then we're going to get into greater detail about it and structure that. And then we're going to go to the casebook and move through that in a very methodical way with cases and that sort of thing. But this lecture will focus on the Constitution and then giving the Article 2 and then giving an overview of presidential power, executive power. So Article 2 about the executive branch, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. So Section 1 is just as it typically is in other sections of the Constitution. It's straightforward. It's sort of let's get the particulars down in terms of how this all is going to work, how you become president, and what the process is. The next part is going to be altered by the 12th Amendment, but let's look at the original. The electors, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators, which would be 2 for all states, and representatives, which varies depending upon the population of the state, to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector, right? No senator, representative, or person holding an office of trust, profit under the United States shall be appointed as an elector. In other words, you can't have politicians already sitting in power be an elector or someone holding another office. Government officials are out of it, right? That's the point here. Okay, now the next part, is where we're going to come to the 12th Amendment. Originally, the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. And they shall make a list of all the persons voted for, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify, and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. President of the Senate now, right, is the Vice President, right? The structure now. We'll get to that. The President of the Senate shall, and the Presidents of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be President, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if there be more than one who have such majority and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and the majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. It's complicated, right? And a lot of manipulation here. In some ways, I'll finish reading it. This has to do with the concern over the president being all-powerful like a king and that sort of thing, which spooked everybody, right? So in every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes of electors shall be the vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. There's a lot of manipulation, a lot of verbiage about how we're going to elect the president and then the vice president. There are functional things here that don't make much sense. You have to assume that people running for the presidency, there's an adversarial position between them, right? So having the person with the second greatest number of votes, if you will, be vice president means there's already a tension between the two. In fact, we see that right off the bat with Madison, second president. There's a conflict. The vice president really wants nothing to do with the president, and so drags his feet and it becomes problematic. There's lots of problems with this part of the first article about electing the president. The 12th Amendment is going to adjust and deal with a lot of that and make it a lot simpler. I want to point out that still, to this moment in time, the one branch of government that we do not elect directly is the executive branch. We do not elect the president directly. We do the House, which was the first, right from the get-go, to have popular, voting in the electorate. And then the Senate fell eventually, where that's also direct. But to this day, it's not direct. The voting for the President of the United States is not something that is done directly. It goes through the Electoral College. Now, there are any number of political reasons why the Electoral College still stands. Some political scientists and constitutionalists support the idea of an Electoral College as giving a greater voice to the minority, numeric minority. And others say it's a sort of manipulation of the system. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I do not support the Electoral College. I think that the Electoral College, even if we say the upside is, and I'm not so sure it is, that it gives a greater voice to smaller, states and the like, is not really important enough to sort of mess with the system that should be straight away. In other words, if we just had one person, one vote moving across the country and got rid of the Electoral College so that the states themselves don't necessarily have a say in who becomes president, it's understandable that early on that would be the case, because early on they were fearful again that this president would become a king, and governors of states especially did not want their power eroded. So there's a lot of measures to prevent that from happening. That's what all this verbiage is. But it becomes problematic. So my feeling, again, full disclosure, my feeling, my belief is that one person, one vote. So right now, if there's a majority vote for a Democrat or a Republican in a state, then that person could win all the electors of that state. Now, that's changed for some states. Some states it's proportional, and there's other configurations of how they're going to deal with dividing up those electors. It used to be that elector, regardless of the public's choice or vote, could choose whoever they wanted. They could break from the public, the popular vote. Typically, the electors are appointed by parties. They're people that are being rewarded for their party loyalty, that sort of thing. But nevertheless, if we started off with one vote, no state would have any more say than the number of people in that state, which seems perfectly proportional and perfectly acceptable. So that if you live in a state that's a Republican state, and you know that given the candidates, the Republican's going to always win the electors, you may not come out and vote. State's never going to vote for the Republican. I'm going to lose my vote anyway. But if you know that those votes are going to accumulate across the states, it makes sense to come out and vote, because your vote for your Democratic candidate, although it won't win the day in your state, but there's no electoral college now, it would be added to all the other votes across the country. And even if there are those states with greater populations that could swing the vote, so be it. That's just the way it works. So one person, one vote. Now, there's another reason why, there are several, why there's a desire to keep the Electoral College in play. You can figure out which states are going to be clearly in the Republican camp or the Democratic camp, and you, if you're a Democrat or Republican, could spend less time in those states trying to garner those votes, because they're going to give them to you anyway. So what really happens is a bastardization here. Those few states, right, that are toss-ups, right, are states that those candidates are really going to go to a lot more and try and take those swing states and move them into their column, vote for them. So you give an inordinate amount of power to those states that are neither red or blue, but are sort of on the line, purple. They're sort of in between. Why should they have that much power? Why? Why should that state count more? Because of the Electoral College. Now, some would argue Well, the party that's most popular then would always win. So what? That's the way it is. If that party has managed to garner a lot of support, then that party deserves to win the presidency, if that's how people are going to vote. So I've not heard, to my liking anyway, a coherent argument, and coherent's kind of strong, but an argument for keeping the Electoral College in place. I don't support it. I think it's an aberration. I think that we need to vote for the president directly. And we shouldn't concern ourselves with making it easier for politicians to go to fewer states and spend more money there. It also helps, by the way, keep third parties out. Third parties, almost impossible to win an election because you can't, you're fighting the Democrats and Republicans who control states getting on the ballot, your third party. And even if you do, like Ross Perot did, it takes a lot of money and you're you're not going to win. And so, if anything, you could be a spoiler. You could take enough votes from one of the other two candidates that they don't win, in which case you've got a manipulation of the system once again. So I can see no value to Electoral College. Not if you want open and fair and consistent elections. It should be up to individuals to vote for who they want to vote for, and then that vote should be counted with everybody else's. It may, people say that California has so many people that they could swing every election. Well, it may be that that's true. But how many people in California right now don't vote, say for the Republicans, because it's a Democratic state, that would come out and vote if they stood a chance of having their guy win? In other words, you can have a lot of Republicans in California not voting because it's not going to matter. Now, as the votes accumulate across the state with no Electoral College, then what you've got a lot of people that say, well, wait a minute, this is going to be close, and I'm going to come out and vote in California. So California doesn't so much swing each election, but it brings out more of the vote. And we don't know how those people would vote because I don't think we can really measure that under the electoral system. So it makes a lot more sense to, if you care about, democratic elections, right, to have everybody come out and vote. How many more Republicans would come out and vote in what are now considered Democratic states, and how many more Democrats would come out to vote in states that are now considered Republican states? We need to get rid of, if there's only two things we could do, folks, I'd get rid of the Electoral College and get money out of campaigns. If you want to improve the system tremendously, those are the two things that need to be done, in my view, to make America closer to the representative form of democracy that we all want it to be. So this rather long, bit of setting up structural stuff is not really workable. So the 12th Amendment does the following. Now, I'm not saying the 12th Amendment is necessarily neat and the like, but it is nevertheless it's nevertheless there. Okay, the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. Okay. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as vice president. And they shall make a distinct list of all persons voted for as president and all persons voted for as vice president, and the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president, right, shall be president if such a number be a majority, and then from the persons having the highest numbers, right, so on we go, all right. There's a change here. We still deal with the electors, but now we've got 12th Amendment. We now have the beginnings of the president's system, where we have our candidate presidents and vice presidents sort of working in tandem with each other. In terms of parties and the like, we've got consistency between the two candidates. So you should read the 12th Amendment a little bit more closely, and and see what it does to the actual structure of how we set things up, or how they've been set up, more or less. Okay, so we're going to move forward here. So Article 2, that's Section 1, a bit messy, all right? Okay, the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. Why'd they do that? Because they want an answer to who the president is. We don't want states reporting at different times. You know, the election's over, get the votes in. We want to know who the president's going to be. The design is such that it's supposed to minimize manipulation. States holding back on their electors, that sort of thing. There still have been corruptions in the system, on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. Power is going to lend itself to these sorts of manipulations. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, because many of the founders that would like to run for president were not born here. They weren't natural-born citizens. So the exception here is that those that are citizens at the signing here, even though not born here, right, could run for president. Shall be eligible to the office of the president, neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident with the United States. Okay, two things here. One, once this Constitution is signed, you have to have already been a citizen, even though you weren't born here. From that point forward, you're going to have to be born here. All right. The other provision here is that you have to be 35. And I would like to point out that 35 years of age back then, people were more accomplished. They had done more with their lives in terms of life experience and so on. If you look at the age of Hamilton and others during the time of writing the Constitution, they're young. By today's standards, they're very young. To this day, 35 is still considered very young. Right? Nevertheless, that's the standard. It's never changed. It's 35. And 14 years a resident is because you can have someone that's born here, right? And then goes and lives somewhere else. So they're born, they're a citizen because they're born here, right? Minutes old, they're put on a plane and they're scurried across the ocean to some other country where they live until they're 35. And then they come back and they say, hey, I'm a natural-born citizen. I've kept my citizenship. I'm 35. I'm running for president. The problem and the concern there really was you haven't been here. You really don't know what's going on with the country. You really don't seem to have a commitment to the country. You've not been here. So if you're 35, you've gone after like the first day you were born, and you're gone for 35 years, and you come back, you're not going to be able to really run until you're, 49. That's the basic math, right? Okay, so that's why the residency requirement in tandem with the birth requirement. All right. In case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president. The vice president now becomes president. And the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and the vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president. And such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. So in the case, there's a line of succession, right? Okay. In the case the president dies, vice president takes over. Now they've left it up in this provision, which the 25th is going to address. Okay, so suppose the president and the vice president die. Now what? Well, we got to figure out who would then fill that office. Suppose the third person also dies. Then who would fill the presidency after that? There's no provision for vice president, right? So that gets dealt with in a bit. The 25th Amendment states the following. It addresses this. The 25th Amendment proposed by Congress and ratified by the states in the aftermath of the assassination of President Kennedy, right? The Watergate scandal also, comes into play here. But the 25th Amendment says in Section 1, in case of the removal of president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Clear. Restated, right, from the actual article in Section 1 of the Constitution. All right. Section 2. Whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. They don't tell us how long before the president has to do that. Some don't do it. I mean, they just wait and they wait and they wait. So there's no constitutional requirement that they have to appoint someone by a certain date. Okay? All right. Section 3. Whenever the president transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate, that's the vice president. The vice president sits as the president of the Senate and gets to cast a vote only when there's a tie. So vice presidents don't really show up unless there's an important vote and they may be the tiebreaker. And then they show up as president, they get to cast their vote. And this has happened a number of times where the vice president has cast the deciding vote. All right. Whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, saying he's now able to do it, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. When Ronald Reagan was shot, he was actually in a lot worse shape than they let on. But George Bush, the first, he didn't take over the mantle of the presidency, at least not outwardly. Didn't go into the Oval Office, said, he's going to be fine, the president's fine, I'm just taking care of, I'm just kind of keeping the paperwork moving, more or less. And that was to keep the country from freaking out and thinking that, the president was in, worse shape than we thought. Okay, so basically, the vice president just steps in. Now, here's where we get some interesting things begin to happen. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. There was talk with if you may recall, with Donald Trump that his cabinet was going to invoke the 25th Amendment. Basically, whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments, which is the president's councils, right, or of such other body as Congress may law provide, they say, hey, the president really, can't effectively govern anymore. Okay, so you need a majority of the president's cabinet, and they can begin that process of invoking this amendment, which means they can then have the president removed and the vice president comes in. That's a dangerous bit of business. President's cabinet coming together and saying the person is not capable. And usually it's not about physical stuff, right? Not capable of really executing the office. It puts some very dangerous things in place. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments, which are the cabinet, or of such other bodies Congress may by law provide, transmit within 4 days to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The president writes and says, I can do it. These guys within 4 days of that say, no, we can't. Right? All right. If the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 vote of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. It's important to keep in mind that there is a line of succession to the president. If the president and the vice president both are gone for whatever reason, the Speaker of the House would then become president of the United States until the next election. So presently, you'd have to think about who the Speaker of the House is, and if it's the in party, the party that's in control of the White House, that's somewhat different. But if it's going to be the out party, the party that doesn't control the White House, as is the case right now with Donald Trump, you've got the House is under the control of the Democrats, and the White House, obviously Trump's Republicans, under the control of Republicans. So that means with the president and the vice president, we're no longer able to execute the office of the presidency, for whatever reason, that means you'd have Nancy Pelosi today, who's the Speaker of the House, step forward. All right. The president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation, get paid, which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States, or any of them, meaning any individual state. No double dipping. President gets paid and can't have money coming in from elsewhere. He's got a part-time job somewhere, right? Okay? That can't happen. The concern here is obvious. They don't want the president's loyalties to be divided. That this is where I make a living, yes, but I make extra money or a lot of money here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Can you imagine the president of the United States was also acting as an advocate for some other country and being paid as a consultant? I mean, this is problematic, so that makes perfect sense. You'll notice there is nothing here that says the president can't refuse his salary. Several presidents have said, I'll need the salary. Donate it to charity or whatever the case might be. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. When Obama was sworn in, it's interesting because the Chief Justice, takes a Bible, typically, right? Takes a Bible or whatever from the family, the president's family. Well, they'll say, "I want to use this Bible," if that such is the case. And John Roberts presently is the one that actually was responsible for doing it, right? And what's interesting is that at some point, because Roberts has to say the words, and then the President of the United States, being sworn in, has to repeat. And at some point, Roberts got lost. He forgot the next line or stumbled on it. So the Chief Justice is stumbling on this very short statement. And there's a slight chuckle. You go back and watch it from Obama, who realized the Chief Justice was stuck and actually prompted him. So, Obama was, a constitutional professor, so he kind of had the statement down. I do solemnly swear or affirm, because swear meant something, if you were religious, you would not do that, that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's the statement. The President says it. He's now sworn in, now officially the President of the United States. The President, Section 2, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. So now we're talking about actual responsibilities, and they're going to lay them out here now. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments, his cabinet, upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. So is the only one that can do it, and that doesn't have to go through Congress. President can just grant those, and it's basically done. Except in cases of impeachment, President can't exonerate himself, okay, or others. So basically, what Gerald Ford did, keeping in mind that Richard Nixon, who left office, was not impeached, and that again is a two-part process, not a legal process, but has legal terminology to it. The actual legal process can happen after they're removed, when they can be charged with crimes and so on. So the impeachment process is nothing more, as you'll see, than removal from office. It's got two parts to it. The first part is that the House of Representatives brings up articles of impeachment. It's like an indictment. They lay out all the charges against the president. They then vote on it. If that vote succeeds, then they send over from the House managers with the impeachment to make the case before the Senate, which acts and sits like a jury and has the power at that point to remove the president if they think that the president, in fact, has done something that violates their oath of office or has done something criminal. In the case of Richard Nixon, he was never impeached, but Ford pardoned him. Ford was vice president. President left, resigned. Ford became president and then pardoned Richard Nixon so there wouldn't be any further trials of Nixon in civil court, criminal court, or anywhere else. People were upset about that, but Ford had his eye on the nation moving forward. And this was not a good thing to see a president, hauled up before the courts. Again, full disclosure, I think that it might have been. It certainly, today, it almost seems impossible to take someone who was president or in a high position and take them to task on something they've done and maybe even remove them from office or what have you. Happens with judges in lower courts, but we don't like to overturn elections by removing people. All right. He shall have power, the president, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Now, here you go. He shall have the power, right, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties. This provision is clear, but there's nothing here about who gets to break a treaty, who gets to dissolve it. Presidents make the argument that if the founders wanted the Senate to take part in ending a treaty, they would have said it. They said they take a part in making it. Why wouldn't they have said you're also going to take a part in breaking it? So presidents make that argument. I think it's a very sound argument. Senate makes this argument. Well, if you look at the language, they want advice and consent. So we've granted consent to it, which means we must be involved in the breaking of it or the ending of a treaty. Presidents argue no, and the court has said this is a political question. We can't really help you with this. You've got to decide how this works. Now the court could interject themselves, but not a good idea. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, that's a big one, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, and in the heads of departments. So let me just lay this out. It's a lot of verbiage. Okay, so the entire bit about treaties we've already explored. But you also have the Senate involved in appointing ambassadors. This is usually not too politically volatile. A lot of appointment of ambassadors is sort of political payback for supporting the president. And so it's nice to get an ambassadorship to some country you're from or you like or is going to be a lot of fun. So it's sort of a reward. Also, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not here otherwise provided for. In other words, go ahead and appoint people. Fill up the government with people you need there, because we're not going to sit here and lay out all the possible positions, and those positions may change from time to time. So you guys have got to figure out what positions and who might fill them, and that's why they say, and which shall be established by law. So Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper. In the president alone, they can say to the president, you can appoint people to your cabinet. This is really something you should do. We're not going to do that because none of this was laid out in the document. So now we got to figure out who's going to appoint individuals and how that's going to work. So Congress can say, look, the president appoints this cabinet, appoints someone to the courts, and the heads of the departments can decide who they're going to fill positions with. Okay, the important thing here, right, is judges of the Supreme Court. This is a hot political item because they serve, this, as you remember from Article 3, they have lifetime appointments. That means since they're the final arbiters of the law, they have a lot of power, a lot of say concerning, what particular laws or actions are unconstitutional. So the argument always is that conservative justices appointed are going to decide cases that are consistent with conservative principles or ideals, and that liberal judges are going to do exactly the same thing, but only for liberal causes and the like. I can tell you that conservative justices are never usually as conservative as the presidents that have nominated them think they're going to be, and that liberal justices are usually never as liberal as the presidents that appointed them thought they would be. Yes, they're still liberal, they're still conservative, but there is wiggle room there. It's not as if they rubber stamp everything, okay? Because, well, I'm a conservative, appointed by a conservative president, so, but because it's a lifetime appointment, and because they are the final arbiters of the law, there's a lot of political value in appointing justices to the court. Now, presidents also, for the lower courts, appoint people, lots of people, hundreds of people. And people don't pay much attention to that. But remember, cases come up through those courts, and decisions are made by the justices in those courts. So really, it's not just the Supreme Court, it's the entire court system. All right, the president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Okay, so obviously, if some senator can't complete their term, president would then appoint someone to be there. And of course, it would be if the president's Republican, it would be Republican, Democrat, a Democrat. But then that person, when the next election cycle comes up for that particular seat, that's every 2 years in the House, but every 6 years in the Senate, then there's an election that takes place. And then the public gets to vote for who they'd like to put in that particular seat. It could be the person already there that's been appointed by the president. It could be somebody new. Section 3. He shall from time to time give the Congress information of the State of the Union. This is the State of the Union address. It used to be just written up and sent over to the Congress, but ever since the technology, advanced technology of television and broadcasting has come into play, presidents have found value in going before the Congress and delivering the State of the Union live to televised audiences. It does a lot for their prestige. Also, when you have the full House and Senate sitting there as the president speaks, it gives the president a sense of, at least the public side, authority and power. You also have the Supreme Court justices that don't have to come, but they do show up, right? And they remain silent. They don't really respond to anything. They don't stand up and applaud. They do nothing. There's been one exception I can think of, and that's Alito, who Obama said something, he was shaking his head. And he was reprimanded for that. You don't do that. You don't give any sign. Ginsburg also, when Trump was elected, voiced an opinion about him. And that was also not acceptable, and later apologized for that as well. Presidents of the United States, when they give that State of the Union, nowadays they have a lot more eyes on them, and a lot more people doing analysis of what they've done. And then now, in relatively recent history, we have the out party. So right now it's Trump. So the Democrats, they choose someone to sort of respond to the president's speech after the speech is over. It's a way of minimizing that speech, or at least getting the other side of the story, if you will, out. All right. So I lost my place here. Okay. Where is it? Okay. Okay. And sorry. And recommend to their consideration, this is the State of the Union, such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. That's why the presidents get up there and talk about their policies and what the Congress needs to do and so on. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment. You need both chambers, House and the Senate, to pass legislation. They need to both be there. Or there may be something that's important and they're not there, and the president needs to get them back in order to consider it. He may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. Okay. Section 4. The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, there's a bit of a contention here, right, about other high crimes and misdemeanors. Conviction of treason and bribery. So other high crimes is considered something on the level of treason or bribery, or maybe it's not. The argument is what constitutes a high crime. If you read the language of it, one would, I think, reasonably interpret it as, since the word "or" is there, other high crimes, that treason and bribery are high crimes, and there could be others that are consistent with those. And so if we're going to say we're going to impeach a president not for treason and not for bribery, there better be something on the same level as treason and bribery. And misdemeanors. The misdemeanors part, you can think of it in some ways as just administrative, running afoul of administrative imperatives that the president has to execute. We've never had a president removed from office. I think Nixon would have been, but his party, the Republicans, got him to leave. We've had 3 impeached, right, but none removed by the Senate. I think it's reasonable to say in each of those cases it was political in nature. Certainly the last 2. Bill Clinton for really something that, he lied under oath. Okay, he was disbarred for that. But it was really a personal matter. What he did with an intern, a young intern, and a sexual liaison between them, really that's his business. He's not doing anything to corrupt the United States or giving aid and comfort to the enemy. It's really a personal misstep, if I can call it a misstep, that has to be dealt with in his own life. And most people saw it that way. In the case of Trump, we had a lot of stuff going on here, but none of it bore fruit. Nothing that you could get to the Senate, at least the Senate felt was impeachable enough to remove him from office. And if you go back and look at that with, I think, a reasonably nonpartisan eye, if you're going to remove a president, you really don't want to do it because of some sexual liaison, and you don't want to do it unless you have enough evidence that can be verified beyond a reasonable doubt to remove the president. And I think you can make a very strong argument that that wasn't present in the case of Trump. A lot of people don't like to hear that. They think, but I think if you look at the evidence, you would have to say it would have to be more verifiable than what it was. That there was a whole lot of, things that weren't proven or demonstrated. All right. So you should read that. You should read this. The second, article, Article 2, and you should work your way through that. It's important to get a sense of what the founders wanted. Now, what I'm going to do in the next lecture is pick up and go a little bit more in depth on the executive power so we can really explore that in more of its detail. The Constitution lays out the bare bones, gives us some terms that need to be defined and over time have been to some measure. What we want to do next is kind of go, dig down a little bit and look at, each of these powers and sort of how we define them, important cases that helped us get our minds around them. So you've now got the fundamental constitutional structure. Next is going to be looking at the executive power in greater detail, piece by piece. You should have read already the third and now the second article, read it several times both, to get some sense of what we're looking at here and we're going to be exploring. We're going to dig down on the executive branch for the next few lectures and talk about the cases, and then we'll have one lecture at the end, which will be a lecture to review and prepare you all for the midterm exam. Okay, this is the end of the second lecture in ConLaw 1, and the next lecture we're going to be digging down will probably come in a week.